touchdown, Alabama, let's get it.
The process, no one can stop this. Hottest show in the streets, I bet you can't top this. Rammer, jammer, yellow hammer, come see how we rock this. Alabama fans the best, there's no way you can top this. Recruiting news and interviews, just sit back and watch this.
Recruiting news and interviews, just sit back and watch this.
The process.
Hey everyone, welcome into a new week of The Process, Crimson Tide Recruiting. I am your host, Justin Smith, the scouting and recruiting analyst for Touchdown Alabama magazine. If you're not subscribed, be sure to hit that subscribe button below for me. Also be sure to leave a like whether you are subscribed or not. You can find me here every Tuesday and Thursday evening to break down the latest in Crimson Tide football recruiting news. And on today's episode, with five-star running back Emmanuel Henderson out of Geneva County High School in Hartford, Alabama, set to announce his commitment later this month, I want to take a look at the Crimson Tide's 2022 running back recruiting efforts. Of course, the Tide signed one running back in the 2021 recruiting cycle and five-star running back Kamar Wheaton. It is a chance that they could land one or possibly two guys here in this 2022 recruiting cycle, so I want to take a look at that on this episode. But before I dive into the Tide's 2022 running back recruiting efforts, I do have to hit you guys with those recruiting updates as always to get the show rolling today. So with that being said, let's get the process started. Let's get these recruiting updates rolling with several 2022 prospects, including the Tide in their top schools list recently, starting with four-star offensive tackle Keonta Goodwin out of Indiana. He is a prospect that currently stands at 6'8" and weighs 300 pounds, one of the top offensive tackles in the 2022 recruiting class. He included the Tide in his top 13. It looks as if he's going to keep his options open by just only cutting his offers down to a large top school list with that top 13. He was not the only 2022 prospect who released a big top school list recently. He was joined by Dan Shore, another top offensive lineman in the 2022 recruiting class. He included the Tide in his top 15. I had an opportunity to catch up with Shore before he released that top 15, and he told me that he was in constant contact with multiple members of the Tide's coaching staff, including the Tide's new offensive line coach Doug Marrone. He had a recent Zoom call with Nick Saban. You guys can check out my interview with Shore over at touchdowналabama.com. Another prospect out of Georgia who released a large top school list recently was Jake Pope, one of the top defensive backs in the 2022 recruiting class. He actually took a visit to the University of Alabama recently. With the current recruiting restrictions in place due to concerns over the spread of COVID-19, he was not able to talk with any of the Tide's coaches, but he was able to take in the campus on that particular visit. The Crimson Tide looks as if they are one of the top schools in his recruitment at the moment. There were a couple of guys who released smaller top schools list over the weekend. One of those guys was four-star running back Gibran Payne out of LaSalle High School in Cincinnati, Ohio, which is the same high school the Tide's 2021 four-star defensive back signing Devontae Smith attended. When you look at Payne, he released a very impressive top 5. I will talk about him a little later in the show when I talk about the Tide's 2022 running back recruiting efforts. Another prospect who released a smaller top schools list was Jacoby Matthews, a five-star athlete out of Louisiana. The Tide is continuing to extend new offers. One of those offers today went out to an impressive 2023 defensive back in Ethan Nation. I had an opportunity to see him in action at the Southern Express Border War tournament on last month. I wrote a breakdown of his performance over at touchdowналabama.com. You guys can check out multiple pieces we wrote on Nation before he had an offer from the Tide. He is a pretty impressive defensive back here in this 2022 recruiting class, a kid who actually came up with 8 interceptions in 8 games as a sophomore. I predict that he will be one of the top defensive backs in the 2023 recruiting class. He already has more than 30 offers. We are going to close out this segment of recruiting updates with the Crimson Tide offering a new 2022 running back recently in Nicholas Singleton. I had an opportunity to catch up with him. Another article you guys can check out over at touchdownalabama.com. When you look at Singleton, he is a very impressive prospect at 6 foot and 205 pounds. A bigger running back who possesses some explosive attributes. Nick Saban was really impressed with this film. That was one of the reasons that the Crimson Tide offered him recently. Singleton is another prospect I will talk about in the next segment. But we are going to close out those recruiting updates now. Now I am going to dive into the Crimson Tide's 2022 running back recruiting efforts. With the Crimson Tide looking to be in a great position to land 5-star running back Emmanuel Henderson later this month, I do want to take a look at the Tide's 2022 running back recruiting efforts as a whole, because I feel even if the Crimson Tide land a commitment from Henderson on March 13th, I think it is a possibility that they will continue recruiting running backs here in this 2022 recruiting cycle. And if you look at Henderson's game, he is a prospect who could easily be listed as an athlete in this 2022 recruiting class because of his versatility. This is a guy who could easily line up at wide receiver and catch the ball at the wide receiver position with his lengthy frame. So we may see the Tide continue to recruit running backs even if they land that commitment from Henderson. So I am going to take a look at some other running back prospects to pay attention to today. Starting things off, Kaytron Allen, the 4-star running back out of IMG Academy in Bradenton, Florida. He included the Tide in his top 10 in January. The Crimson Tide looks to be right in the mix with Allen, along with schools like Ohio State and Georgia. When you look at Allen, there's so much to like about his game. He is a bigger running back at 5'11" and 200 pounds. A guy who runs with great balance. A guy who has a hard-nosed running style. A kid who is definitely hard to get on the ground. I had an opportunity to see him in action when I watched IMG Academy take on Edgewater earlier in the 2020 football season. He was the guy who they leaned on late in that game to close things out. He was still running the football hard late in that particular game, so I was really impressed when I saw him in live action. So Kaytron Allen is the first prospect to know when it comes to the Crimson Tide continuing to recruit 2022 running backs. Now we turn our attention to Jabron Payne, the 4-star running back out of LaSalle High School in Cincinnati, Ohio. As I said earlier in the show, he did include the Tide in his top 5 recently. When the Tide first offered Payne, Charles Huff was their running back coach, but it looks as if the Crimson Tide are still in contact despite their coaching changes at the end of last season, with Payne including them in his top 5 recently. Payne is another shorter running back who possesses a lot of speed. I think his speed is one of his biggest strengths at the moment. Similar to Allen, he can also create a lower center of gravity and make it hard for defenders to get him to the ground, make defenders bounce off of him. He will be another great addition to the Tide's 2022 recruiting class if they are able to pull him in during this recruiting cycle. He is a former teammate of the Tide's 2021 defensive back signing Devontae Smith, and he is trying to get him to Tuscaloosa at the moment. So Payne, another prospect to look at. We are going to end this discussion talking about 4-star running back Nicholas Singleton, who I did talk about earlier in the show as well. Nick Saban offered him recently after he said he was impressed with this guy's film at 6 foot and weighing more than 200 pounds. This is a running back who is very explosive, a guy who explodes through the hole, has breakaway speed, good top end speed, a guy who is a pretty all-around running back here in this 2022 recruiting class. I think he is a guy to pay attention to moving forward because he is a prospect who is in the earlier stages of his recruitment. He does not have a top schools list at the moment. He does plan to release one in the future, but he does not have a date on when that will be. He plans to release that top school list, then take visits to those schools once the dead period is lifted. And as we all know, we cannot really point at a date when the dead period will officially end and when it will be officially lifted. But Nicholas Singleton is definitely a prospect who wants to visit the University of Alabama in the future. I'm pretty sure the Crimson Tide will stay in contact. They are going to recruit him virtually, take him through some Zoom visits and all of that, what they are currently doing with recruits all over the country. Singleton is a interesting prospect with the Crimson Tide offering him at this point in the 2022 cycle. I think the Tide's coaching staff really seems to like him. He said he has talked to multiple members of the Tide staff since getting an offer from them. You guys can learn a lot more about Singleton over at Touchdown Alabama in that article I did with the 4-star running back out of Pennsylvania. That will do it for this episode of The Process. Be sure to hit that subscribe button before you leave. Then head over to touchdownalabama.com. Pick up your subscription today. With that subscription, you will be able to read all of our subscriber-only articles. Get your hands on our yearly print magazine issue. Also get an opportunity to read our in-depth scouting reports on each Tide commit in each recruiting class. Then head to the Google Play Store if you have an Android device, or to the Apple App Store if you have an Apple device. Be sure to download the Touchdown Alabama app so breaking news notifications can be sent to your mobile device. As always, I am Justin Smith, the scouting and recruiting analyst for Touchdown Alabama magazine.